Awesome. Well, welcome back everybody to another Lady Leaders webinar. We are super excited. We have Mark Casas himself, one of the main owners of DSN, to just come on a webinar and, discuss when it's time to be bringing on an associate. And as everybody knows, I kind of make these agendas, well, I should say kind of the schedule for webinars, usually a whole year ahead of time. But what's crazy is a lot of times I feel like I'm prophesizing what's going to start coming up in all the coaching calls. And it's funny, as this one was coming up, I found that Mark, and a lot of the hot seats we just did, and a lot of my calls recently, people really are talking about, is it time to bring on an associate? And the thing that I'm loving is within DSI, people are starting to talk about it way sooner than they ever did before. Which is super fun for me, because a lot of times what I find, on coaching calls, if they haven't been in the mastermind long, or they haven't listened to a ton of stuff, is a lot of doctors, owner doctors, tend to try to spend more time working, add more days, add more hours to accommodate the patients, or I'll add another hygienist and just add more time. And often they get to the redlining phase before they even stop to question, is there time for an associate, or how do I get an associate, or do I even have enough for, work for an associate? So what I wanted to start off with both of you is knowing that a lot of doctors wait a little bit too long to get an associate. What are some of the flags that you see when it comes to, doctors often being scared or waiting too long to bring on that associate?
First of all, you're so right. Just today, I did a couple coaching calls, and that was the topic of both.
Yeah.
Interesting enough. So yes, there is a lot of, I guess you could call it fear. I would call it more like over analysis, paralysis by analysis, when it comes to bringing on an associate. And I love that you kind of broke this into like yellow flags versus red flags. I thought that was very clever. It's like, well, what are some of the yellow flags? Like, are there some warning signs, or like what is a good indicator of when is an appropriate time to even start thinking about an associate? And you are right. From what we've seen from inside DSI, people have a tendency to procrastinate and wait just a little bit too long before they start to consider it. And then without the realization that sometimes it takes months. So you have to actually start thinking about this before the true indicators are saying, yes, double thumbs up, right? You have to kind of look at the trajectory of the way things are happening, how things are actually progressing within your practice. So if you think that maybe you'll be there in 3 months, 4 months, you need to start thinking about it now. If you think that you'll be there in 6 months, it might be time to start poking around and even start doing some investigation now. But yeah, to your point, though, I think that one of the big things is that we have to be sure that we have enough patient flow to support a doctor. But I think that is very dependent upon a lot of things. That's dependent upon the physical capacity of the dental practice. That's dependent upon how dependent you are on your own personal income. And if you could take just a little bit of a haircut as the owning doctor and give up some of your production if necessary to bring on a full-timer. I think that is there enough hygiene to support a new doc? Is there enough patient flow to support a new doc? Those are some of the things that I look at. Also, case acceptance, right? So if your current case acceptance is hovering in the 40%, and you're unequipped or don't feel qualified to train somebody and onboard somebody to give a decent case presentation, and you haven't been successful in that yet, then you're going to have an inefficient model that you're bringing them into. So those are just some of the things that I think about right off the bat.
Yep, absolutely. Ashley, what about you? What have you seen with, and I wanted to actually specifically ask you team-wise, what do you see as things that the teams are noticing when doctors are waiting just a little bit too long to bring on an associate?
That's a good question. I think it happens when there's frustration. Like, you're setting goals with your team, right? Like, they have production goals that they're going to hit, and they have, those types of things. And if your team is coming to you and they're like, Doc, I can't get a new patient in for 4 months, but I'm still supposed to hit these things, but we can't get anyone in from this time. I think that's a good point to start paying attention and hopefully hitting that before it gets too far, like Mark was saying as well. Sorry, dog barking.
Um, well, and the thing that I find is, and I obviously for myself, but then, to both of your points is from the team standpoint, a lot of times we start to, when we're redlining, they're redlining. So when we're running 2, 3 columns, trying to fit more in, trying to squeeze it in, I always joke if the whole like we once in a while have to work through lunch means we always work through lunch. We once in a while add emergencies at the end of the day turns into we're always doing that. Teams often start to feel the effects of that. What used to be once in a while is now becoming all the time. The other thing that I find is teams will start to complain of there's no time to actually work on implementation. So sometimes doctors, that means literally if you have 2 assistants and they are both running nonstop all day long with no time to implement, you'll never be able to get your systems solid because they just don't have the time unless they're coming in on off time, which I'm not here to say is right or wrong, but just teams may start to complain about those things. From the doctor's side, Mark, I absolutely, everything you just said is exactly, what often I'm hearing is they're finding, their days are often really, really busy, but I would always caution doctors to make sure are your days busy or productive. Once, what you said too is I'm always looking at, if you're having a busy day, but you're hitting your goals, then you are probably in a good position to be able to give some work to somebody else and equip them well. And that presentation I just did, actually, that's one of my biggest things I look at is the dollar per treatment plan, the dollar per treatment plan. And I want to find out, can somebody treatment plan comprehensively?
Yeah.
Because if in your office you do some more, bigger procedures or extractions and implants and things like that, it's super, you're in a great position to bring on an associate with the right, metrics. However, we've got to ensure that you can actually discuss really optimal care for all patients, have a good treatment acceptance so that you can mentor somebody up as well. One of the big leading indicators that I know, obviously Jake has taught us is really looking at the number of exams that you have per month. And that's something that, here's my only thing with that, is I think we can get really pigeonholed into, we need 150 to 175. And I tell people like so many things in dentistry, that's a generalization. In my mind, you have to really look at, is this fee for service? Is it out of network? How many new patients do you get versus how many limiteds do you get? Are you equipped to do same day treatment and things like that? The reason being is depending on skill set, efficiency, treatment planning, I've seen so many of my doctors need far less. Like right now, one of my best producing doctors, he only needs 110 exams per month, and he's pretty consistently able to do about 100,000 a month, between I would say 90 and 100. And that's because of the skill set and because of our low participation in insurance. So you have to know your practice before you look at the number of exams, I would say, but ideally, I would tell people 150 total exams is just kind of a baseline. But once again, if this young doctor, say, would come in and have a limited skill set and low dollar per treatment planning ability, they're going to need more exams. They can use less exams if they have a bigger skill set, they're more efficient, and they know how to treatment plan. But I'm going to stop there and kind of check in with both of you. Mark, did anything spur when I was talking about some of those flags to bring in associates?
A lot of things. First of all, I love that you talk about dollar average per treatment plan. That is something that a lot of people don't analyze. I think that is so important when you're looking to calibrate philosophies, right? So if you have a really super productive schedule yourself and you're considering bringing on an associate and you don't have an effective kind of onboarding and calibration process, I've seen this happen personally when I wasn't as smart as I am now because of the people that I hang around, right? So like I have an average of let's just say $3,500 to $4,500 per my average case presentation is about that, right? And I'm like, okay, this person has 2 years of experience. They came from a very busy office. I'm going to abdicate their kind of uh new patient experience to how they've done it in the past. And I'm just going to go about my way and remove myself as the bottleneck from this situation, liberate some time so I can spend some time acting as a CEO instead of a clinical provider, et cetera. And then you look back 3 months later and it's like, oh, goodness, they're producing, $60,000 on the same number of patients that I am producing $200,000. And then you look at the average dollar amount per case presentation. First of all, you'd have to look at how effective they are at giving those presentations. So like if their case acceptance is like below 40% and their dollar value for their cases is 2,500 or sub 2,500, it's like, uh-oh, I need to do some calibrating like really, really fast. So those are the things that you don't see right away. It's a slow burn and a slow bleed, a slow drip. And before you know it, the same number of patients that goes through their column versus yours is 50%. So I love the fact that that is one of the metrics and one of the KPIs that you track is dollars per case presentation on average. So that's awesome. One of the coolest things that Jake discovered through all of his many analysis of P&Ls and looking behind the curtain of many different dental practices was that law of diminishing returns with recall exams. So that 120 mark of recall exams, and when you say kind of redlining, that's like 150, 170. We've seen people 200 plus. And the way that you have to think about it, guys, I know you've talked about this before on Lady Leaders, is the way that you have to think about this is that with every additional exam that you do past 120, there's a law of diminishing returns. So you're not spreading that production out amongst several providers, but you're less effective in every single exam because you're rushed. You're seeing 3 clinical columns and trying to get over to hygiene. You're looking real quick. You're not diagnosing effectively. You're not building rapport, and you're not seeing everything that you could see if you were fresh and you weren't rushed. So the law of diminishing returns is real. And then if you add 30 new patients to that, like you're looking at plus 200 exams and you're just fried. You're not giving the patient a good experience. You're not effectively treatment planning and you're not closing cases. So that's where that number comes from. And this is after looking at hundreds and hundreds of dental practices. And this is just a trend that we've noticed. Jake was really good at spotting that. So those are just some of the things that I totally agree with you. And these are some of the things that you have to think about when you're bringing on associates. But the sooner that you can remove yourself as the bottleneck, if you can calibrate correctly, if you can um, uh, get your philosophies in line at the very beginning, those are some of the risks that you can overcome before they even catch their stride.
And I mean, that's even in your interview process, being able to understand philosophy of care. And one thing that I think is so important is when you're bringing on an associate, they've gotten very used to the language of other offices that aren't in the DSN network. And what they're used to is I want 2 columns of hygienists, 2 columns of hygiene, or I need as many new patients as possible, which by the way, also gets in the way of when you're ready to bring on another associate. So it's super important for them not to see it as hygiene columns or columns, but rather what's the number of exams that's your sweet spot? Because what Mark and I were saying is it's so subjective based on the doctor themselves, their capabilities, their efficiencies, and their skill set. So I tell doctors all the time by tracking their numbers, it's not about how many, how much volume, it's about what do I do with it? Because to your point, and I just got done with this presenting at the mastermind about how actually what I find is a lot of time recall exams can actually have really high dollar per exams because so often they were quick checks for year after year after year. They weren't almost given that fresh set of eyes. And we find a lot of times when that new doctor comes in, depending on how they do it, they can find a lot of things just because we were so rushed. It starts to tank your own production because you can't get up that many times to do exams. And the other thing is you can't effectively see limited exams. You get them in your schedule and you can't turn over same day treatment. So I say if all of these things are happening, you look at your total exam count, you can't do same day treatment, you can't treat limiteds, which in my opinion is one of the biggest practice builders ever. If you can't do that, it may be time for an associate. Ashley, I'm going to check in with you because as we're both saying this, you always have a different point of view. Anything that's come up for you with it?
So something I've noticed too is, I mean, my big expertise is determining when people need a personal or executive assistant, right? And I feel like some of the same things start to cross over with regards to an associate. And it's, you know, that you're starting to feel, you know, overwhelmed. You're starting to really hate seeing those interproximal fillings on your schedule because you know you could be doing more and higher production things. And it's kind of little, those are those little yellow flags like, oh, like I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And like you said, the sometimes work through lunch turns into always working through lunch. It's a form of delegation, bringing on these associates and learning good delegation skills, like you would with an, you know, any type of assistant or OM. Is it's kind of the same with the associate. So starting to notice those little feelings you're having of dreading certain types of appointments or dreading um, the working through lunch, like it's kind of a, you know, soft thing like, oh, listen to your gut and trust your feelings. Well, at least it gets you to then look at your numbers and see where you're at. But yeah, it's just kind of starting to notice those things, so then you do, like you said, have time 3 4 months before you actually are like, holy S word. Now, like you're making me not cuss now, Summer, to not get an associate.
Son of a seahorse. Um,
Yeah, there you go.
exactly. Well, you don't get to that point. But I find that, a lot of times there really is, whether it be, like you said, some sense of, over analyzing. Often there really is fears of doctors. And I think it's, the things I've heard is, if I'm honest, I hear doctors say all the time, I'm scared to bring an associate in because I've worked so hard to build this reputation. Yes, I'm feeling all those things. Yes, all that's happening, but I've worked so hard. I'm scared that a bad review or 7 or 12 are going to come in. I have a fear of losing money. I have a fear of the team not liking them. I have a fear of now all of a sudden I'm, monitoring somebody else. Those are some of the fears I've heard. What about you guys?
Yes, 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 and all of that.
Yeah,
I've kind
yeah,
of experienced those feelings myself.
yep.
One of the things that I say often is that part of the overanalysis and procrastination that comes when this decision needs to be made, and you're overdue and the yellow flags are starting to turn orange and they're about to be very red, is that I think it's important for people to recognize that no HR decision has to be permanent,
Mhm.
right? So if there is a misstep and somebody squeaked through the filtering process and they're not ideal, you don't have to stay with this person. You can, free them to a new future, even if it's after only a couple of months. If they are a great culture fit, but clinically, no matter how much mentorship you've provided them, they just aren't working out, and there's a bunch of redos, and you have to fix those. That's a pain in the butt, but that's not the end of the world. And if you have a good recruitment and filtering process, if you have a great training and onboarding process, that's going to decrease the likelihood that those negative things are going to happen. But if they do happen, it's happened to all of us. I mean, I've probably had 50 associates in my career, and probably less than 10% have washed and not turned out great, but some of them do. Some of them do. Some of the times that I really worried was when, they're moving from cross country and they're pulling kids out of school. Wife is going to leave their well-established job and get a new job in your area, and you're taking kind of a risk that way. Those types of situations made me a little bit more nervous, but that only happened to me a couple times. Other than that, HR decisions do not have to be permanent decisions. So you don't have to lay awake at night for 6 months wondering if it's the right decision. Just pull the trigger after you've gone through the proper kind of protocols, and the rest is going to be chance. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And that's okay.
Yep.
I have to add to that too, Mark. I mean, that example too of when you were moving someone across the country, because I was there, I remember this.
You know
you
exactly
know,
what I'm talking about. Yeah.
um, I know exactly what you're talking about. It gives you more motivation too to make this work. You're going to put more energy into your onboarding process, and Lord knows the onboarding of an associate is like its own webinar in itself. But if you have your protocols lined up and you have um, you know, vetted this person to make sure their culture aligns and that they have the same values and that type of thing, then that's going to be less threatening than if you're like, yeah, no, sure, we're in California, move over from South Carolina, and we'll make this work. Um, the other thing I was going to say too, oh heck, I just forgot. It'll come back to me. Um, but
It
that,
always
yeah, I was just going to add to that.
always
It always
does.
does.
It may come in at a different time, but that's totally fine. So, well, and on that note, I mean, Mark, I'm the same way. I think literally I counted and I've had like 14 associates over the years.
Yeah.
And, I think you got to start somewhere. The beautiful thing about DSN is you're going to get better and better and better with, um, there's so many resources that can help you with bettering how you do hire and onboard. And that's what I found to be the most pivotal is when I first began, recognizing, okay, I need more associates, I used to try, whether it be team members or doctors, I would always try to sell them on us. Here's why we're so great. Here's why you should choose us. Here's why, I can sing and dance and I'm so funny. And I think, unfortunately, that's, in my opinion, going about it all wrong. And I think, for me, I have had the ones who have come from across the country. And the thing that I've changed so darn much is really in my hiring process, I ensure that there's multiple agreements made from the very get go.
Mhm.
And I don't take upon my shoulders, you're moving here. To your point, I'm going to do what I can to make it work. I'm sure the heck going to make sure that my onboarding is solid. I'm going to make sure, I was prepared. But what I'm not going to do is put that burden upon my shoulders. What I am going to do is say, this is who we are. This is what we're about. This is what we care about. Your my stuff is open to you to be able to see and make a transparent decision for yourself. This is what it's going to look like when you get here. I invite you to come out, spend as much time as you can, because listen, I get that this is a big decision, and when you come, this is what you can expect from us, and this is what we need to be able to expect from you. If that's something we can have an agreement on, then I don't feel that sense of, no matter where they come from, whether they came from another office or they came from across the country, I try to be really careful about how I interview, the methodology around interviewing, which is a whole separate, once again, webinar. But I've just gotten to where I refuse to have that power transfer end up being all with them and none with me. Because then I feel like I'm on my heels the whole time, reacting and trying to make everything okay for my associates. Oh, you need me to do this. Oh, you need me to do this. Oh, this isn't enough. And I want to ensure that I set them up for a sense of, you know, we're going to do exactly what we said, but we're going to expect you to do exactly what you said. And I think that's helped us a ton with ensuring that we're getting the right fit. They're moving or they're doing what they need to do, to get here and set them up well and accordingly. Anything on that for you guys? Because Mark, I'm sure you've had the same thing where you used to sell them on you all the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much wisdom in what you just said there. I mean, I think you can draw the analogy to clinical work as well, right? Like if you're excavating decay and it's half a millimeter from the pulp, you didn't put that decay there. So the patient getting angry with you that 3 months later that turns into a root canal, like, come on, like this
Yeah.
is your personal responsibility. If you are defining exactly what success looks like and you're very clear about your expectations, like clinically, here's what our expectations are from a production standpoint, from a case acceptance standpoint, from a development as a leader and communicator. This is what we're looking for. And you're super clear about it. It's in black and white. There's an accountability agreement that's signed. You have at some point you have to remove that responsibility from your own shoulders. So I love that. There's a lot of wisdom there, and I didn't even cover that. But yes, I couldn't agree more. But yes, there is a risk of things not working out, and it's important that you proceed anyway, despite that fear, and the possibility that that might happen, because the upside is so glorious. I mean, I can't, can you imagine if either one of us decided to be a single doc provider for our entire career? First of all, you and I would still be cutting crowns like after 20 years of doing this. And
I don't
we
think
would,
any of us would be here if that was the
We
case.
wouldn't. This would not even be a thing, right?
true. I mean, at some point you have to take a leap of faith and say, hey, look, if they're 90% as good as I am at anything, that's a win. So if you have a growth mindset, this is just the first step in many, many steps to what I would call that freedom practice. And what my definition of a freedom practice is a fair amount of redundancy. I used to call a freedom practice a practice that had 40% overhead and like as few moving parts as possible. 3 operatories, fine. You know, that's a freedom practice because you're not saddled with debt, et cetera. Now, my new definition of a freedom practice is there has to be a fair amount of redundancy, which means that you're not the only provider. In fact, triple yourself. There's not just one person at the front desk, but there's I don't know, 3. There's not just one, one hygienist. There's several. So you're less vulnerable to the whims of human resources, right? So that's that in my definition, that's the new vision of a freedom practice. And you're never going to be free if you're the sole provider or if it's you and another part-timer and you don't have enough capacity in your physical location. So there's a number of different check marks, I think, that you need to create freedom for yourself in this role.
Right. Well, and I think all of us can attest that, a lot of times as doctors are struggling through these fears of the reputation of the what if it doesn't work or what if they go to the practice next door. I tell people all the time, like, you really can be ruled by fear or by love, by fear or abundance. And I'm not here to say which one's right. I'm here to say all the decisions I know personally I've ever made that were fear-based kept everything small and kept everything scary. Whereas when I took the leap of faith and I made those decisions based on love and abundance, everything has always worked out from there because I learned, I grew, I felt the freedom, I felt the sense of being able to leave my practice. And, can doctors who are sitting here right now and they're sitting in this moment saying, I hear you, I hear all 3 of you, this sounds great. I'm still just nervous about whether it be production or things like that. I want to say, I get it. And of course, can you drop all insurances? You can have a boutique practice, absolutely, and crush it, still take off 6 weeks a year. But don't forget, if something happens to your hands, or for me, if something happened to me where I couldn't practice for 18 months, I just tell people you're still in that vulnerable situation. If you are so blessed to be able to grow and consistently keep growing and adding patients, you've done something really well. So congratulations. It may be scary, but what I will say is if you're looking for freedom of time and actually ultimately financially, this can be something that adding that associate can change your whole world, I think, to our point as well. And I get it. I get that it's scary, but I'm like, you started a practice. This is less scary than starting a practice, in my opinion.
Way less scary, way less risky.
Yep.
Way less.
Yep.
The thing I was gonna. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You remembered.
I remembered. The thing that was shit, I forgot. I'm just kidding. So out of fear, some people won't even like place an ad. Like you're not committing to anything at that point. It's okay just to place the ad and start to feel things out. And some people are so afraid to even just place the ad. And that's like for any position. I preach out, like, just start. It's okay to go fishing. You can start to see what's out there, start to feel it out, start to, test the waters. It's 100% okay to place that ad. That doesn't mean you're committed to hiring someone who applies. Place the ad, see what happens. That's the thing I was going to say.
Yeah, it's so true. By the way, Ashley, I live by that mantra. You probably taught it to me years ago. I have ads out for everything all the time. Take them down, put them
Just
up, take them down,
constantly.
put them up. I do that
She's
for
a
everything.
catch and release.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't have to get married every time you swipe right, Ashley?
Nope, 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 exactly.
Don't I know it, Mark?
Yep. Yep. So, so yes, I mean, that is absolutely the point. But, I think that don't let the fear keep you from making the decision to potentially give yourself more freedom. And on that note, one of the questions I get, because I see that we've actually covered a lot of this just in our conversations, but the consequences are big for continuing to redline for your team, for you and your family, I think. And so knowing that, I think taking the leap to looking for an associate is such a wonderful next step. But with that, for people who are saying to themselves, what about exactly the metrics? Well, we've talked about number of exams, we've talked about production, we've talked about new patients not being able to get in. One thing that I will say is if you're currently a 5-day-a-week doctor, you very likely are, depending on number of exams, you're probably ready for that associate. You'll likely be able to cut back a day and automatically add that to the associate. And I tell people, to Mark's point, if they like just kind of loose numbers, I say if you can produce 80% of what you did before in one day less, that's a great start. So let's pretend you work 4 days a week and you produce, I have no idea, 100,000 a month. Can you get 80,000 of that in one less day per week and change your daily goal? In my opinion, that's a great place to start, especially if you do some bigger procedures, even like extractions and bone grafts and things like that. Can you produce 80% in one less day a week? So just make your goals. If it was $8,000 a day, can you make it $9,000 a day to make up that amount? That way, too, you'll always have a day to work on admin time and be able to work with your associate. You do have to ensure you have time to work with the associate and meet with them on a consistent basis. Sometimes I see general doctors continue to crank so hard, keeping up with that 4 or 5 days a week, that they never have time to hardly sit with their associate, watch them, listen to them, take time with them consistently. So those are kind of some loose metrics. If you're thinking to yourself, I'm scared about losing production. Anything else on that for either of you?
Yeah, I could talk about this particular point for a really, really long time. So if you're thinking about, I love your analogy here, or the round number that you selected. So let's just say that you are currently producing $100,000 a month. You need to make a little bit of room for the associate as far as new patient flow and hygiene checks, et cetera. So let's just say that you shave off 20% of that production. So you now drop to $80,000. So if you're paying yourself like usual and customary associate, your associate, $1,000 a month to $24,000 a month. Okay, so that's a $6,000 delta. At some point, if you can handle that, or the seasoning period as you're bringing this associate up to speed, and you're keeping your overhead and your profitability ranges reasonable, between 50 and 55%. There is a point, it doesn't happen right away, guys. So don't be under the impression that it's going to happen in 30 days. It might take 3 months, it might take 4 or 5 months, but at some point when this associate starts ramping up and they become a real producer within your dental practice, they're going to start to become a profit center for your practice. So at some point, you're going to recover that $6,000 delta and then some. And then you can think about, well, I went from 5 to 4. I would really love the lifestyle of going from 4 to 3. And then now you're going to look at that same math and say, okay, before I was producing 100 and taking home 30. Then it went to 24, but the profitability of the associate as a profit center now covered that. So as they continue to ramp up and you start to begin even further tighten down that overhead, because increasing revenue is going to decrease your fixed cost, which is going to increase your profitability, you're going to be able to close another delta of leaving for another day. And then that's how people eventually get down to 2 or 1 days, or eliminate themselves as a clinical provider altogether. If you have the physical capacity for it, it can happen sooner than later, especially if you have a good demographic where new patients is no problem. But at some point, even decreasing your days is going to increase your actual take-home income if you do this the right way, if you execute well. We see it happen almost all the time.
Truly. And that's why it is so important to that point that I tell people you can't keep working every day clinically and expect this to happen as easily. What's funny is it feels counterintuitive to take time off and I tell people because on that CEO day or whatever, you're simultaneously doing exactly what you said. You're mentoring that doctor to start being a profit center as quickly as possible. That doesn't happen if they don't have face-to-face time with you consistently, if you're not listening, if you're not mentoring, if you're not, helping them with hygiene exams. But then also, I mean, this was my kind of secret sauce was I simultaneously was able to consistently work on overhead and systems in the practice on that day to make things tighter and more efficient while working with my first associate to get her as profitable as possible. And so it seems counterintuitive to reduce time to make that happen, but it happened exactly like you said, because that was the magic of DSI for me in the beginning, was helping me learn how to actually end up making more money without the use of my own hands. And it really just becomes, a numbers game, but then an intentionality game too, being really intentional about that CEO day, and doing those two things, lower overhead, help mentor that associate as much as possible.
And it's formulaic. It's not only formulaic, but it's just arithmetic, right? That the cool thing is that we can literally tell you, like, okay, your delta is going to be $6,000. That means the associate has to produce this much, which is going to increase your profit by this much, which was going to take this amount of time to get to there. And it's formulaic. There's no voodoo to it. Like it's all math.
It absolutely is. And I always joke with people, I'm like, everybody here knows I threw in my first associate terribly. Because I had to like literally leave to go have massive surgeries in California. And so I did it terribly, and it still was able to work out just from a number standpoint once I was able to see, what was going on. So you have people here have so many more resources too to be able to kind of help with that as well. And so, truly, hopefully everybody's starting to feel that fear lessen. Ashley, anything with what the two of us have been talking about before I wrap it all up?
Just to tag on, I mean, it goes back to effective delegation in any capacity. And I give a talk on delegation. And, one of those things is providing them with the tools to be successful and then following up and giving feedback, which in this case is, calibration. And you guys touched on that, of course. And if you're not dedicating that time to calibrate and giving them the tools to be successful, which is your information on where you want them to be and how you're seeing things, then it's not necessary, you're not necessarily setting them up for success. Also, Summer, we have a question here too, with regards to, do we have any suggestions as far as where to post and where to find an associate, especially in rural areas? Caitlin has tried Indeed, Practice Matchmaker, Rep, Schools, DDS Match, Paul Goodman's service. Do you have anything outside of the box that has worked for you, or is it just kind of that constantly looking like you talked about?
And Mark might have some too, because I think, he was in kind of a rural area too. One, I always say, look at your ad first and foremost, and be really careful who it's speaking to and then where you're placing it. Like, where do the people who you would want to attract hang out? Not just kind of just put it everywhere.
Shotgun.
Yeah. Honestly, Paul Goodman, next time I need an associate, I'll be using his services, but I've heard people have really great results with him. And then the third one that I tell people is talk to all your reps. Tell every rep hey, especially if there's any corporate offices anywhere in like an hour radius. I tell people to tell your reps.
Okay, so again, I feel like I could talk about this for hours and have a whole episode just on this one particular subtopic. I do think that if you're looking at ads side by side, if your ad is no different than another ad and your offering is no different than another offering, and there's nothing even tantalizing enough for them to get to call you versus another ad, there's a good chance it's going to fall flat. And if you happen to be in a rural area, which I was for 3 of my practices, then you have to even get more creative when it comes to that, right? So again, it comes down to math. It really does. I remember there's another fear-based something about bringing associates on, it's like, well, what's the percentage? What's the compensation? I mean, is it crazy to say that I would offer them like a signing bonus? Like, is that just going to be money that I'm going to throw out the window? Once again, you have to have like a really, really good reason or good way to separate yourself from the masses that are looking for associates, especially if you're in a rural area. So if that means signing bonus, if that means flexible hours, if that means more paid vacation, if that means a slightly higher percentage when it comes to compensation, there needs to be something that you come up with as like a radical differentiator. And when it comes to something like let's just say a signing bonus. Okay. There's ways to do it that decrease the actual risk. You could amortize that out over 6 or 12 months. So I know it's crazy, but I had a $20,000 signing bonus. And this was, for the last 5 years that I owned dental practices. And it worked out really, really well because I amortized that over 24 months. They had a $20,000 signing bonus. And every month that they stayed, they got a little bit more of a bump on their paycheck for that actual signing bonus. But I mean, the $20,000 signing bonus got people to answer that ad and consider moving to a rural area. And then they realized that it was a great area to live. And we had tons of production and lots of new patients for them. And that what happened to be my radical differentiator. But you do have to look at the math. So if I'm looking at, oh my goodness, that's an extra $2,000 a month I'm going to be paying towards a signing bonus for 20 months or for 12 months, that's crazy. I don't know if I could even stomach that. It's like, we'll do the math. Like, how much is one associate, even if they're a semi-decent associate producing $75,000 a month, how much value are they going to add to your practice as far as profitability if you're at a 50% overhead, if you're at a 55% overhead, if you're at a 60% overhead? I guarantee that $2,000 per month for that signing bonus is going to be insignificant. So those are the sorts of things that you need to make sophisticated business decisions about something that you may feel emotional about. Like, I was never offered a $20,000 signing bonus. Why should I offer some brand new kid out of school a $20,000 signing bonus? Well, here's the reason, and here's the potential upside for that. So again,
Yeah.
I could talk about this forever. Sorry.
Yeah.
And then the last thing too is also don't be married to your ad. You may listen, I know that your magic is in doing your dentistry, but that doesn't, and you wrote this beautiful ad and it's incredible and you're so proud of it. If it's not working, change it up. Chat GPT is a magical force of magicalness. Just ask it to rewrite it, ask it to revamp it, ask it to do it in a different voice. Don't be married to your ads. If it's not working, change it up.
Yeah. Well, and for the person in the rural area, and if you have any corporates that are around, speak to exactly those doctors who are looking for a reason to leave, but are just not sure why. And that's where I'm always like, truly speak to that person. And I say, what are their pain points? Put yourself in their shoes. And if, by the way, you are ever in their shoes, then you know the pain points. Are you tired of blank? Are you looking for this? And literally write out what would be their pain point and what would be the paradise that they're looking for. Write that all out and make that your ad and let it speak to them. And to Mark's point, like, I'll have to admit, we couldn't always offer, in the beginning, some of these big giant things. So instead, I talked to my accountant. He's like, what if you offer them tuition reimbursement? By the way, that's a really great tax strategy as well. And you can put that right in the ad. Hey, are you looking for tuition? I'm having a moment right now.
Like student loan reimbursement or
thanks.
something?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. I'm blaming Vegas Air. I don't know. But
it's definitely Vegas Air.
Thank you. That's what I'm meaning. But like, that's actually a really great tax incentive. And for a lot of people under 5 years, it's something that would really speak to them. But things like that, I made a flexible benefit package because I knew some younger doctors, like what speaks to them is not always the 401k. It might actually be help with childcare because they have really little ones, or it might be help with, something beyond CE, like in-office CE, because they can't travel, especially if you have young moms. So like, what are the pain points? What could actually speak to the generation of the people that you're looking for, and change your benefit package to actually, sometimes it doesn't end up costing more. It just speaks better to the people that you're actually looking for. whether it be, like I said, gym memberships or flexible time off was a huge one. And I gave them some days of paid time off at $500 a day. The thought that they could have paid time off was huge for some of them. So to Mark's point, like sometimes we can get in our own way of thinking, like, I never had anything like that, but you know, it is what it is. So I'm like, if I need to switch things around to figure out how to incentivize, how to speak to the people who would really enjoy working with us, I'll do what it takes for that sake. But that is, by the way, if you're one of the doctors sitting there right now thinking, okay, fine, you guys have, convinced me that maybe it's worth looking at. The next steps really are, we talked about it, creating that ad, getting that ad ready and just posting it in the different venues. I know in the chat, there's lots of things posted around that, so take a look. You guys are so blessed that, in DSN and just there's so many options for looking at creating an onboarding packet. Creating how would you want to onboard these new doctors? Because I know for me, I didn't have that, and that would have been so helpful. And just remember what you're really more or less putting together is philosophy of care. What is your philosophy of care, and what does it look like with case examples? So show case examples. What would be the philosophy of care with it? You're going to put in there, the basics of how meetings are, the flow of the day, hygiene, exams. How do you guys kind of put those together in your office? What does it look like flow wise? The basics of the office, things like that. You want to put that all together somehow in some packet form or some sort of document form where doctors can actually look through that. So that's something that you could start doing now. And I tell people along with that, my doctors don't carry that around underneath their arm every day, everywhere. So I joke, it's nice for them to have to reference, but I make as many videos as I possibly can for everything. So I tell people one of the things you can be doing right now is, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but record yourself. Record yourself doing as many exams, as many different type of exams as possible. If you do certain procedures that you feel okay about recording, start recording those procedures now and make a private YouTube channel that you can host them all, or Vimeo, or whatever you like. And start honestly putting those in, some sort of YouTube channel, because I tell people if you're doing that right now, that's going to speed up your onboarding exponentially, because doctors will be able to log into that. I did that with Vimeo with a ton of Invisalign stuff as I'm training new Invisalign doctors. And it just makes it something they can always reference. It's at their access all the time. And that's something you can be doing right now to prepare. But like I said, DSN is full of different ideas. Anything else, though, that I'm thinking doctors could be doing right now?
No, I think really, really good tips. Really good tips. I think that advanced clinical education, even within the dental practice, like you said, like if you are, a whiz at doing guided implant surgery, or even, freehand implant surgery, that's huge. Like if you want to ease somebody into endo by allowing them to do like single canal root canals first and then bicuspids, and you're standing over their shoulder, and then they slowly ease into molar root canal. That is something that not a lot of people have the patience to do. And if you don't have, the bandwidth or the budget to send them across the country for all this clinical CE, set aside time from your own schedule and stand over their shoulder and talk them through certain things. Like those are the sorts of things that people are actually looking for in lieu of like a formal residency, or they're coming out of a residency or coming out of dental school, not feeling super confident in their clinical skills, but you see promise in them from a cultural standpoint and an ambition standpoint. Those are the people that, man, you could take them under your shoulder and just really create a clinical superstar if you onboard them correctly. So lots of really good ideas that you talked about there, Summer.
Yeah. And I think so much of, oh, forgive me. Sorry.
No, just to add to that too, those things that you do that you think are super easy, you're like, oh man, I could do that in a heartbeat. Those are the things that, sometimes not everyone does things as super easy as you do. And, sometimes it's like you overthink that maybe someone might not know how to do that. But if you find something super easy, or you've, a system or a routine that you have down, those are really great places to start as well.
You actually took the words right out of my mouth, Ashley, which was like, that's part of your ad right there. Like if you do implants and you do them super well, and you're consistent with it, that's something that I would speak to Mark's point, like that would be part of my ad. Is if you're looking to have an incredible mentorship right here in office, you don't have to go anywhere. That's something that, we have the ability to do here. That speaks so much to exactly those kind of avatars that are looking for that CE, but they want it in-house because they can't travel as easily, or they don't want to travel as much. So you took the words right out of my mouth. So I think there's often more differentiators than people even realize as owners. So, well, to wrap it all up, I mean, hopefully we gave people an idea of what are the yellow flags that people may start to be feeling, and their teams, I think, are starting to feel. We just hate to see people get to that red flag and then have their families start to pay the price of just pure exhaustion all the time. And they can't even enjoy the weekends either. Yeah. So I think we all talked about the yellow flags. We talked about certain metrics, numbers of exams, treatment plans, things like that can really help doctors understand how to more successfully implement an associate and feel good about the metrics. We talked about what are the next steps when you're looking for an associate, as well as the fears that sometimes creep in our way that keep us from looking for associates. But anything kind of final words, both of you, before we say goodbye?
No, I would just say take the leap. Don't be scared. And there doesn't have to be none of these decisions have to be permanent. If all the yellow flags are telling you to push forward, it's time. It's time.
Ashley, any final words?
Yeah, I can only add to that, and that's the trust your gut, because that intuition is, if it's telling you that it's time, obviously analyze your situation, take the facts into account, but trust your gut.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, hopefully there's some good information there for everybody, some good stuff in the chat box, I know too. So thank you both for making the time. I'm super, super grateful for both of you. It was really fun. So thanks, guys.
Thanks for the invite. Good luck speaking tomorrow in Vegas this summer.
Yes.
I know you're going to kill it. You always do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, guys. So, all right. Have a great day. We'll talk to you and see you at the next Lady Leaders webinar.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.